And we're live. What is up, my friends and fans? Brennan here again. And today I'm going to be reading the rest of The Bold. I'm just going to wait for everybody here to show up and, kind of say hi to me. Stuff like that. Forget about this. Um, anyway, I have plenty of water on standby because, fun fact, when I finished the live stream for the first part of reading the bolts, it really did wonders on my vocal cords a little bit. Hey Ferret, hey Liam. So I'm gonna have to tone down on the impressions a little bit, just to keep myself from damaging my voice anymore. So anyway, hey Tony, hey Gigaham. So without further ado, let's get started. When we last saw the bolts, they were out in. When we last saw the bolts, they were out in Kenton. Let's see. Oh, here we go. When we last saw the bolts, they were making their way through Kenton Safari Park, showing their children all the animals that live in Africa, their home. So, and now we get to find out what happens in Chapter 8. It comes as no surprise to me that animals can talk. I'd be more surprised if they couldn't. I have always talked to my pets and felt sure that they understood me. And I don't just mean good boy and bad boy. The other day, I had a very interesting conversation. With my dog, Albert, about classical music. His favorite composer is Mozart. He said Bach. All living things communicate. Even members of the royal family know this. Apparently, they chat to their plants, mainly rhubarb. Yeah, I'm okay, Chris. Why? I haven't seen much of In the Night Garden, so I can't say for sure. When humans talk to animals, it is one thing. But when animals talk to each other, it is very hard to keep up. It's like listening to a foreign language, which of course it is. Dogs bark to each other over the garden fence. Woof, woof, woof. But we can only guess what they are on. About. Goldfish open and close their mouths, but we can't hear a word. Only other goldfish understand. Hey, Serenity. As the bolts entered the hyena enclosure in Kenton Safari Park, the conversation between Mr. and Mrs. Bald and the resident hyenas was really quite advanced, as far as animal conversation goes. The safari hyenas didn't speak English, although they understood it. So I think it will be easiest if I just translate. The safari the safari hyenas didn't speak English, although they understood it. So I think it will be easy if I just translate it all for you. Otherwise, it will just be lots of grumps and shrieks, which wouldn't be much fun. Which wouldn't be much fun for you to read, nor would it make sense whatsoever. If you're talking about the original Muppet Babies, then yes, I have seen a few episodes. Mainly the cartoon episode, where they learned about how cartoons are made and different types of animation. TTD3? What are you talking about? They're both bad. They're both terrible executives that should have never went into the business world. I don't know how Zaslav became an influential person when all he's been doing is making Warner Brothers look like shit. Bobby and Betty, although they hadn't been taught much hyena language, instinctively understood the general gist of everything that was said because they were actually because they actually were hyenas. But I know I can but I know I can translate for you because I'm very but I know I can translate for you because I'm very clever. And that's all I can say on the matter. Now let's get on with the story. Ah, before we do, but before we do, I need to explain a couple of things. There was a clan of six hyenas living at Kenton's Central Park. There was a clan of six hyenas living at Kenton's Safari Park. A, a couple named Boo and Edna, a couple named Boo and Enna, their three young pups that their three young pups born that spring, and a gnarled elderly male named Tony. They had a nice life with plenty of fresh meat thrown to them by the keepers. They had a nice life with plenty of fresh meat thrown to them by the keepers, a warm burrow to sleep in that night, and plenty of space to run around in. Yeah, it is a hard question. I can't say for sure. Probably whatever YouTube poop kind of I'm I can't say for sure what my least favorite YouTube poop is, but I think it has to do with overly long jokes and scenes that go on for too long. That's all I can say. Hey Ozzy. They didn't even mind the endless stream of cars driving past or the people inside leering at them. Boo and Enna would sometimes put on a bit of a show, running around chasing their tails or doing loud hyena laughs, which seems to amuse the which seemed to amuse the human visitors. They were protective of their three pups when they were first born, but proudly showed them off now they were a bit older. I don't like Vion I don't like Vion anymore. Remember? I left the community like a month ago. They're both good shows, but I'm gonna have to pick South Park. My favorite ragdoll production? I have a few favorites. Uh, Actually, I think I have two. Rosie, Tony, the older male. However, Tony, the older male, was feeling his age. He had a touch of arthritis and mostly lay about. He had a touch of arthritis and mostly lay about in the shade, dozing, although he managed to get his feet when it was feeding time. Although he managed to get to his feet when it was feeding time. All of the hyenas knew their keeper well, and even and the evening before the Bull family visit. Feeding time had taken place, as usual, at 6 o'clock. Yes, there are some pictures in here. Boobot's basically Diet Teletubbies. That's it. It's like they wanted to capture lightning. It's like Ragdoll wanted to capture lightning in a bottle twice. I can't name locomotives because I'm not really much of a train person. Plotagon shouldn't have happened. Dare I say it's even worse than Go Animate, or Beyond if you want to get current. No, and I don't want to. Yes, I have heard of Space Jam. The hyenas were always ready for their food, and would pace up and down the fence of their enclosure, waiting for the truck to arrive. The keeper would then throw tasty chunks of meat through a specially designed through a specially designed. The keeper would then throw tasty chunks of meat through a specially designed hatch. I don't care for bubble. I don't care for bubble guppies. Yeah, I would like to make a cartoon. I'm actually in the conceptualization of making animated shorts. I just don't know when it's going to be out yet. I don't know what my favorite Lionsgate movie is. I have heard of Brainiac Adam. And if you're talking about JJ the Jet Plane, I have seen him in my childhood. Um I mean it doesn't really hold up very well with the CGI and all, but I just think of it as like Thomas the Tank Engine but with jet planes. Tell me about it, CBK. Hi, Sophia. I have heard of Sonic Prime, and I did see a little bit of it in a call with Crispy Toast. My dad's friend has seen Lightyear, and that's all I can say. Let me just get some water here before we continue. Least favorite Pixar movie? From all the movies I've seen, at least, uh, I know Cars 2 is pretty much the worst movie ever made by Pixar, but I don't really know which Pixar movie I think is the least bad. From all the Pixar movies I've seen, I'm not sure which movie is my least favorite. Though I did hear some bad things about Cars 2. I like the first Toy Story movie. Could you not bring up any Beyond questions anymore? I'm not part of that damn community anymore. I've seen a little bit of Coraline, and I thought it was good. Hello. Hey. Let me just get some water here before we continue. I've only seen the original How the Grinch Stole Christmas by Chuck Jones. From this point onward, any question relating to Go Anime or Beyond will be ignored. Yesterday, though, there had been someone else with her, the vet. As the hyenas tucked into their dinner, they could see the vet watching them and taking notes. This in itself was not that unusual. Since the pups had been born, the vet often came. Since the pets had been born, the vet often came to take a look and check that they were healthy and happy. But this time, the vet was clearly interested in Tony. But this time, the vet was clearly interested in Tony, and he was writing things down on a clipboard. "What's with the vet?" Boo asked Anna. "Who knows?" replied Anna. Seems to be watching Tony very closely. Have you noticed Tony?" Tony couldn't see or hear particularly well at his age, but he knew when he was being watched. Nosy Parkers, nosy Parkers, he muttered with his mouth full. Making a note, making a note of my middle-aged spread. I shouldn't wonder. How rude of them. I don't know. I tried using OBS Studio once, and it didn't really work out so well. Sad to say. Family Guy. That show's been going on for too long, and it's been getting worse and worse with every season. At least since, like, I don't know, season 10 at least. Tony had been at the safari park for many years, and used to be the leader of the hyenas. But nowadays he enjoyed his quiet life. He finished his dinner and dozed off to sleep. Boo and Anna's Boo and Ina were licking the pups' faces. Boo and Ina were licking the pups' faces clean when they heard the vet say to keep when they heard I like Phineas and Ferb. It's cool. No, why would I hate tweenies? I don't know, Lola. Boo and Ina were looking Boo and Ina were licking the pups' faces clean when they heard the vet say to the keeper, "It's very sad, but I think it's time we put the old hyena to sleep. He's a tired, gray-haired old fella, and that arthritis is clearly paining him and causing him a lot of trouble. Very soon the hyenas will turn on him and kill him. It happens in the wild, and I don't want it happening here. I think we should put him out of his misery." Wait a minute. It's very sad, but I think it's time we put the old hyena to sleep. He's a tired, He's a tired, gray-haired old fella, and that arthritis is clearly paining him and causing him a lot of trouble. Very soon, the other hyenas will turn on him and kill him. It happens in the wild, and I don't want that happen. And I don't want it happening here. I think we should put him out of his misery. Yes, I like Home Alone. I actually own it on a VHS as well as its sequel. Okay, said the keeper. It's for the best. We've got a lot of tourists coming this week, so let's do it. Next Wednesday, after the park is closed for the day. Next Wednesday, after the park is closed for the day. Righto, agreed the vet, making a note of the date on his clipboard. Righto, agreed the vet, making a note of the date on his clipboard. Righto, agreed the vet, making a note of the day on his clipboard. Sad, isn't it? He's had a good run, said the keeper. Been here longer than me. But he won't feel a thing, will he? No, not at all. See you next week. Yeah, I have heard of Martha Speaks. I used to watch it a little bit when I was on PBS Kids. I actually remember watching a few episodes in Michigan and at my grandma's house when I had the chance. I have heard of the Netflix reboot series of the Teletubbies. It's literally just the 2015 reboot, but with a different narrator and a different baby son. Or should I say, sons. Yeah, for some reason they decided it was a great idea to include like multiple sons in Teletubby Land because I guess they wanted diversity, which I don't really get. I mean, diversity is fine. Diversity is fine, but not when somebody doesn't ask for it. Hold on a second. I gotta check something here. Let's see now. Okay. Um, I remember Angelina Ballerina. I have seen Angelina Ballerina, at least the original. I've only seen a tiny bit of the next steps. Boo and Ina stopped what they were doing, horrified. No, said Ina. Not Tony. They can't. There's nothing we can. There's nothing wrong with him. He's just old. He grumbles a bit about his arthritis, but he's definitely not in constant pain, and there's no way we'd ever attack him. And there's no way we'd ever attack and kill him. How could they say such a thing? Said Boo. They looked over to where Tony was sleeping, happily oblivious. We must try to. We must try and stop them, Ina said. But how? There's nothing we can do. There's nothing we could do, I'm afraid, said Boo. Once their minds are made up, that's it. Poor Tony. We can't tell him, said Ina sadly. Yes, I like Fireman Sam. Not season 6 and onward, though. Though I do like it. Though I do like Fireman Sam. I haven't been keeping up with Disney, so I can't say for sure. We must let him out. We must let him live out his last few days, happy and content. And they both resolved to be especially nice to Tony, giving him the finest bits of meat to eat and letting him sleep in the most comfortable spot in the burrow. He only had another 7 days. I like Lazy Town, as a matter of fact. Funny you should mention it, because it's actually one of my main inspirations for writing. Chapter 9. The chatter in the Bolts' car was at fever pitch as they entered the Hyena enclosure in the park. My tail is wagging inside my trousers like no one's business, said Mr. Bold. I just can't believe we are going to see some of our brothers and sisters at long last. Can we get out the car and play with them? Asked Bobby. Unfortunately not, dear, said his mother. The rules are very strict. The rules are very strict about that. But isn't it exciting? I've never even seen another hyena, said Bobby. Apart from us. Apart from us? What shall I say to them? We will use animal language, said Mr. Bold firmly. I expect it. I expect it will come naturally to you, added Mrs. Bold. Once you hear it. Did you hear about the hyena who drank a pint of gravy? He made a laughing stock of himself. The Chica show is meh. I prefer South Park, since it's much more smart. Yeah, I've heard of Let's Go Luna. The only thing I know about that was that it was made by Joe Murray, the creator of Rocko's Modern Life and Camp Lazlo. Wow Wow Wubsy is fine. I mean, it's not really the best, but I certainly get entertained by it every once in a while. Look! Shouted Bobby. There they are! The hyenas were about 50 yards ahead, not far from the car. The hyenas were about 50 yards ahead, not far from the road. Tony was lying on his back, and the pups were climbing all over him, nuzzling his whiskered face and tumbling onto the grass before jumping back onto his stomach. Yeah, I have heard of Yo Gabba Gabba. Used to watch it all the time at my grandma's. Probably season 12 or something. Tony was smiling at them indulgently, occasionally giving each pup an affectionate lick. While Boo and Ina sat side by a few while Boo and Ina sat sad while Boo and Ina sat side by side a few yards away, looking on proudly, but checking that the pups' game didn't get too boisterous for Tony. They've got babies, said Betty. puppies, said Betty. 3 of them! That's just so cute! Unable to contain their excitement any longer, Fred and Amelia began shouting their greetings. Hello! Over here! In the Honda! And don't give the game away, but we are hyenas too. One last question. I couldn't answer that question, classic film collector, because I've never seen any of them. Yeah, it is the same art style. Go figure. Boo turned to the Bolts' car, looking confused. Had he really heard hyena voices? Then he saw them. Don't look now, Ina, but there's a car full of hyenas dressed as people, he said. You're having a giraffe! You're having a giraffe, said Ina, peering towards the Honda. Good heavens, she stammered. I do believe you're right. They both blinked their eyes in astonishment. Yoo-hoo! Shouted Fred. We are so pleased to see you. Are you okay? Ina and Boo shouted to Tony to stay with the pups, and then they ran closer to the Bolts for a better look. A little bit, in my opinion. Yeah, I have heard of Shrek, and I haven't seen much of Archer. What on earth? Said Boo. Yes, you really are hyenas. I've never seen such a thing, said Ina. Who are you? Where are you from? How come? It's a long story, friends, said Fred, quickly introducing himself, Amelia, and the children. But we came here from Africa a few years back. Found some passports. Now we live in disguise. We've even got jobs at. I got an overwhelming urge to get out of the car and sniff some hyena bottoms, interrupted Bobby. You'd be very welcome to, said Boo. We do it all the time. But I don't think the keepers would like it. No, Bobby, said Mrs. Bold. We must stay in the car. This is my Boo, and I'm Ina, said Ina. Hi, Ina, said Fred. Hyena! That's funny! Oh, yes. Oh, yes, agreed Ina. Never fails. And everyone had a jolly good loud laugh. And I should mention now that duplicate questions will also be ignored. The problem solvers. I just can't go through a single episode without having to, douse my eyes in something. Everyone, both clans, had so much to talk about, all of them amazed to meet some other hyenas. After a while, Ina called the pups over to meet their new friends. And Tony also ambled over, scratching his head at the sight of the Bolts. Living in a house? Sounds very nice, he said. It gets a bit cold here in the safari park in wintertime. In fact, I think I've got a touch of arthritis in my back legs. I may have a lot of unpopular opinions, but I can't list them all. And I have heard of the amazing one of Gumball before. I think it's something. I'll give you that. Still, we mustn't grumble. Still, we mustn't grumble, said Boo. We're looked we're left we're looked after very well here. Nice food delivered to us, cut up Nice food delivered to us already cut up at 6 o'clock on the dot every day. Now, if you'll excuse me, said Tony, I've got a call of nature to make. He wandered off into the long grass to attend to it. What a sweet, adorable chap! What a sweet, adorable chap! Said Mrs. Bold. He's like the granddad we never had, said Bobby as he watched Tony limp off. It's all so sad though, said Ina, her voice. It's all so sad though, said Ina, her voice quivering with emotion. His days are numbered. Why is that? Asked Mr. Bold. Ina couldn't bring herself to tell the story, so Boo took over. Yes, I like Little Bear. I think it's a very calming show. And I know this because, well, I have seen a few episodes. It depends on how good they are. The vet says Tony is too old. Thinks it's his. The vet says Tony is too old. Thinks his arthritis is too painful. But the worst thing is, they think that because he's weak, Ina and I will attack him. But we never do that. He's practically family, and our pups adore him. But his voice he drew his claw towards it. He drew his claw across his throat. Next week. No! Said Betty, horrified. They're going to kill him? Well, yes. Put him to sleep. We heard them talking about it yesterday. Tony doesn't know he's a condemned hyena, said Ina. We thought it best not to tell him. It's too awful. He's such a lovely, kind old dear. And they are putting him down just because he's a bit past it? Asked Mr. Bold. That's terrible. Yes, I like Franklin. Can't we take him home to Can't we take him home to live with us? Asked Betty. How can we, dear? Said Mr. Bold. This is a safari park, not a rescue center for homeless animals. Just then, the keeper's Land Rover drew alongside the Bolts' Hyena. For the park hyenas to spend so long next to one car was a cause for concern. And they told the Bolts to move along and make sure their windows were up. Mr. Bold rubbed his chin for a moment. We have to go, he called as he began to edge the car away. But listen, maybe, just maybe, I can think of a way to help poor Tony and save him from the fate that awaits him next Wednesday. What's the context, classic film? Boo and Ina yelped with relief. Boo and Ina yelped with relief. I can't promise, but let me think of something. I will come back to I will come back and tell you what the plan is when I have I can't promise, but let me think I can't promise, but let me think of something. I will come back to tell you I will come back and tell you what the plan is when I've had time to work something out. Everyone howled their hyena goodbyes, and the Bolts drove off. Pretty much any reboot made by Cartoon Network. Yeah, Cyber Chase is a good show. But one takeaway I have from it is, why haven't they saved Motherboard yet? Like, it's taken them like, I don't know, 13 seasons, and they still haven't saved Motherboard. They already ran out of math topics, and they're just starting to get into the eco stuff. And, Gilbert Godfrey died, and, well, why couldn't they just make a finale where everybody, like, saves Motherboard or something? Maybe then it would feel earned. Chapter 10. The effect of meeting some other hyenas, and more particularly, the fact that Tony, the older hyena, was going to be put to sleep, had made the Bolds very thoughtful by the time they got home that day. I thought it would be more fun, said Mr. Bold, but now I'm not so sure. It was certainly no laughing matter. Yeah, yes, I have watched the Magic School Bus before. I used to watch it at school, and I think I also watched it when it was on Netflix. I mean, the complete series, anyway. Well, I would make YouTube a lot better by bringing back the dislikes. Because I think dislikes are like because I think it's pretty useful to have some sort of criticism. That, and I would also fix the copyright system. Because YouTube seems to get a little too obsessive with copyright. Oh, right. Okay. Wonderful as to meet Wonderful as it was to meet some animals the same as us. Wonderful as it was to meet some animals the same as us. I don't feel particularly happy now, said Mrs. Bold. Human beings are horrible, cried Betty. How could they do such a thing to How could they do such a terrible thing? Human beings are horrible, cried Betty. How can they do such a thing to How can they do such a terrible thing to poor Tony? How can they do such a terrible thing to Tony? I don't want to live like a human I don't want to live like a who I don't want to live like a human being if that's what they are like, said Bobby crossly. I'd rather go back to the wild. I'd rather go back to the wild. But luckily, a clever hyena plan had been whirring around in Mr. Bolt's brain on the drive back, and he had perhaps thought of a way to save Tony and cheer everyone up in the process. How would you feel, he asked, if Tony came to live with us? Oh, yes, said the twins. Yes, please. Yeah, I like Curious George. I think Mr. Rogers left too soon. He was like everybody's neighbor, and his appearance definitely shows. Uh, but what do you mean, dear? Asked Amelia. How could he? Well, it isn't going to be easy, but I think there is a way we could rescue him. Now, have we still got the map of the safari park? Now, have we still got the map of the safari park? Mrs. Bull took it out of her handbag and passed it to him. Mr. Bull spread it out on the table and studied it carefully. I see, he said. We only have a week, so we better act fast. And we're going to need the help of Minnie. Betty, give her a call and see if she can come over tomorrow morning. This evening we will clean out the spare bedroom, which is full of old junk, old sticks. We only have a week, so we better act fast. And we're going to need the help of Minnie. Betty, give her a call and see if she can come over tomorrow morning. This evening we will clean out the spare bedroom, which is full of junk, old sticks, and half-chewed bones. The next few days are going to be very busy indeed. Just as well it's the school holidays. And we're going to be working on the dead and we're going to be working in the dead of night. So I'm afraid no one is going to be getting much sleep. All right, see you. All right, see you later, Gigaham. See you later, Gigaham. I think Mr. Rogers and Bear are both good. The one thing I hate about modern television is the fact that networks don't really give shows a chance. Take, for example, Nickelodeon. I mean, ever since SpongeBob became big in its mid second season, it's been overshadowing a lot of other shows, some of which only got like a few seasons. I mean, if SpongeBob ended like now, then Nickelodeon would pretty much be dead. Okay, now you're just make. Okay, now you're not just. Okay, now you're just not making sense. Like I said in the last live stream, Pingu's very relatable. I don't really like wild krats. Sorry to say. Let's see. Oh. Let's see. Hi, Franco. Fred took the next few days off work to carry out his plan. First, he drove back to the safari park in the morning and told Ina and Boo the details. And they were so excited they jumped somersaults. It's brilliant! They laughed and chortled. But you need to talk to Tony, said Fred. If he isn't happy about coming to live with us. But you need to talk to Tony, said Fred. If he isn't happy about coming to live with us Bolts, then we can't really do it. But the alternative is too awful, said Ina. And he can come and see you whenever he feels like it, added Fred. Right, said Bolt. Right, said Bolt. I like that idea, because we are going to miss him here. So what exactly was Mr. Bolt's plan? So what exactly would Miss So what exactly would Miss So what exactly was Mr. Bolt's plan? I hear you asking. Well, it involved digging. Lots of digging. At night, the Bolts were going to dig a tunnel from outside the safari park. Mr. Bolt had chosen an area by the perimeter that was sheltered by some trees and scrubby bushes, so no one would notice. Clifford the Big Red Dog is all right. Meanwhile, Ina and Boo were digging from inside their burrow, unseen by the keepers. All being well, the two tunnels would meet halfway. Tony could escape, then the tunnels could be filled in. By the time the safari park keepers arrived for work next when By the time the safari park keepers arrived for work next Wednesday, the tunnel would be gone, and Tony would be warm and cozy in the Bolts' spare room. But then what? Asked Amelia. Once they discover Tony has gone missing, there will be terrible trouble. Headline news: Hyena on the loose. There will be house-to-house searches and everything. We could all be in danger! Only the name. Fred had thought of this too, and that's where Minnie came in. Her father, you might remember, was a butcher on Teddington High Street. Fred had thought of this too, and that's where Minnie came in. Her father, you might remember, was a butcher on Teddington High Street. So Minnie's task was to get some big bones from the fridge storeroom at the back of the shop that could then be strung that could then be strung around that could then be strung. So Minnie's task was to get some big bones from the fridge storeroom. So Minnie's tasks wa- so Minnie's task was to get some big bones from the fridge storeroom at the back of the shop that could then be strewn around the hyena's enclosure. Then the keepers, discovering Tony was missing, would put two and two together and make five, and assuming that then the keepers, discovering Tony was missing, would put two and two together and make five, and assume that Tony had been eaten by the other hyenas, just as they predicted. Of course, I like Pizza Hut. Can't say the same about Odd Squad, though. Uh, let's see now. Okay. Okay, could you stop that? It's getting. Could you stop that, classic fan? Could you stop that, classic film? It's getting a little annoying. It might seem a little grisly to you as a human being, but not as grisly as what the vet, a human, was planning to do to poor Tony, a hyena. The whole unsavory business would be hushed up, and no unnecessary publicity would result. A spot of cannibalism among wild animals isn't unheard of, and they would quite reasonably think nature had simply taken its course. Hang on a second. That was the plan anyway. But it could. That was the plan anyway. But could it really work? Fred didn't know, but it was the best plan he had. In fact, it was the only plan he had. But could it really work? Fred didn't know, but it was the best plan he had. In fact, it was the only plan he had. I like Pepsi, Coke, Dr. Pepper, RC Cola, Sprite, and A&W. The digging began that very night, long after most people had gone to bed. All four bolts crept out of the house and got in the car. Now, for you and me, being up all night would feel very odd indeed. But in actual fact, hyenas are nocturnal. Like owls and bats, they like to sleep during the day and go out and about under cover of darkness. This was another habit the bolts had to break when This was another habit the Bolts had to break when they arrived in Teddington, in order not to draw too much attention to themselves as they pretended to be humans. Glad you like it, Ferret. Uh, but they now slipped easily back into being awake at night, as their journey to the safari park started. And so too did Betty and Bobby. At the sound of the car engine starting, a light went up. At the sound of the car engine starting, a light went on upstairs in Mr. McNumpty's house, and his big cross face appeared at the window, peering out at them, peering out at them, and scowling. For some reason, he was a touch nocturnal himself. Pooh, said Pooh, said Mr. Bold. We've been spotted. Pooh, said Mr. Bold. We've been spotted. Never mind. No law against going out after dark. The Bolds drove to the Bolds the Bolds drove to Kenton and parked by the high wall at the back of the safari park, checking no one was about. Checking no one was about, but they scuttled to the chosen spot, hidden behind a thick covering of ferns and brambles. What now? asked an What now? asked an ex- asked an, What now? asked an, asked an excited Bobby. Listen, everyone, said Mr. Bolt, as he consulted the safari park map. This is where the hard work begins. The hyena burrow is exactly 60 yards in that direction. He signaled to the other side of the wall. And we've got to dig down and then across. Boo and Ina will do the same from their side. They tell me they are very good at digging. So they can do as much as we do every night. Tonight is Thursday. We have to get 5 yards along every night. And so do they. Though they can do some digging in the daytime too, if they're careful not to be seen. But by my calculations, we should meet in the middle sometime on Thursday. By my calculations, we should meet in the middle sometime on Tuesday night, at the latest. Then we can get Tony out. I don't necessarily. The only kind of mukbang videos I really hate is if people just use them as an excuse to stuff their faces with large amounts of food. Just ask Nikocado Avocado. Somewhere between spring and summer. We hyenas are very good at digging, added Mrs. Bold reassuringly. And there are 4 of us, so we can take it in shifts. Does this mean I've got to get dirty? Asked Betty, wrinkling up her nose. Yes, sweetness, said Mr. Bold, rolling up his sleeves. Covered in muck and dirt from head to paw. Digging is second nature to us. You'll love it once you get going. Mrs. Bold reassured her daughter. Gross, said Betty. Let's do this. Let's do this thing, said Bobby, chuckling. Mr. Bold spent a minute choosing the right spot to start the tunnel, and then got down on all fours. With his front paws, he began to scratch at the ground, moving leaves and twigs to one side. Then, pressing harder, he started to dig. The topsoil was dry and powdery, but once he got into his rhythm, it became dark and damp, and big clods of earth were loosened and removed. Then he started in earnest, head to the ground, his front legs digging faster and faster until they became a blur. And out behind him, from between his hind legs, came a spray of earth and sand, like a garden hose at full blast. And slowly, as the hole he created got bigger, his head and shoulders disappeared from view. You're not alone on slow internet there. I don't like corn dogs either. After 10 minutes, he stopped for a break, reversing back out. His snout was covered in earth, and he was panting for a bit, his big pink tongue lolling out the side of his mouth. He never looked less like a human and more like a hyena. Mrs. Bolt thought him very attractive. "Here, dear," he said coquettishly. "Here, dear," she said coquettishly, pouring a bottle of water into a bowl and placing it on the ground. "Have a drink, in the old-fashioned way for once." Mr. Bolt got down and lapped at the water like a thirsty dog. Or hyena. Practically, yes. I have actually told my family about my YouTube channel, and they think it's doing it wonders for me. I've even told some of my in real life friends about it, and well, let's just say they're quite surprised at my subscriber count. "Wow, Daddy!" "Wow, Dad!" said Betty. "You look wild!" "That felt good," panted Mr. Bold. "Who wants a go?" "Me, please," said Bobby. His paws had been twitching to go. "Me, please," said Bobby. His paws had been twitching to have a good dig the moment he saw his father start. "Off you go, then," said Mrs. Bold. "Hop in." Bobby gave a yelp of excitement and leaped into the hole. It was as exhilarating as riding a bike for the first time, and he took it like a duck. It was as exhilarating as riding a bike for the first time, and he took it like a duck to water. A few hours later, all four bowls were covered in mud, filthy, tired, but gloriously happy. Even Betty had loved her first digging experience. Giving way to her hyena instincts for once had been deeply satisfying. "Who knew?" she said, admiring the black earth beneath her fingernails. "It's more fun than anything else. It's more fun than any. It's more fun than anything else. Ever!" "I want to be a professional digger when I grow up," announced Bobby. They had dug the first 5 yards of the tunnel, and as the dawn was beginning to break, Mr. Bolt said it was time to go home. "We've made a good start," he told his family, "and we'll be back to dig some more tomorrow." "Bath and breakfast," said Mrs. Bold. "That reminds me. Why did the bank robber take a bath? So we can make a clean getaway." Chapter 11. For us humans, it is difficult to understand how wonderful the feral activity of getting down and dirty was for the Bolts. Although they were on a mission to save poor Tony, the nightly visit to the tunnel and the frantic digging and getting covered in muck and filth was, to them, a form of liberation. Like a caged bird suddenly being allowed to fly free in the endless sky. Well, I guess. I mean, I have seen the I Love You, You Hate Me documentary, so I guess I've grown as little. I guess I've grown a little soft side for Barney, but not much. I'm taking a bit of a I'm taking a bit of a break from collecting VHS tapes because I want to save my money, for college and whatnot. Nope, I haven't watched a Paddington film, though I am familiar with Paddington Bear. Uh, it's a good thing I've got plenty of water on standby. The Bolts were happier than ever. The Bolts were happier than they could ever imagine. The only the Bolts were happier than they could ever imagine. The Bolts were happier than they could have ever imagined. The only sad part was washing up all the mud when they got home each morning. Bobby and Betty had to be reminded to walk primly on their hind legs again, and Mr. Bolt had to stop himself from rubbing his rump on the garden gate. The only worry was the troublesome Mr. McNumpty, who not only seemed to observe them leaving the house late each night, but also saw them returning, caked in dirt mud. The only worry was the troublesome Mr. McNumpty, who not only seemed to observe them leaving the house late each night, but also saw them returning, caked in dry mud. They're both bad. Excuse me. I've got my hand up on Christmas. My favorite Christmas movie. I have a lot of them, but I'm gonna have to say Charlie Brown Christmas. But Mr. Bull knew there was nothing they could do about their nosy neighbor. But what they did was their own business, and Mr. McNumpty could be as curious as he wanted. He would never know what they had been up to. Three months ago, the tunnel, meanwhile, was progressing according to Fred's plan. It was, roughly speaking, a round tube. About a yard and a half. It was, roughly speaking, a round tube, about a yard and a half in diameter. Some tree roots dangled down in places, water trickled in and formed puddles, moles peeked in through the walls occasionally, wondering what was going on. But it seemed sturdy enough. After all, it only had to last a couple more days, and then Tony could be transported out of the safari park to say. After all, it only had to last a couple more days, and then Tony could be transported out of the safari park to the safety of Fairfield Road. Yes, and he sucks. On Monday afternoon, Mr. Bold visited the safari park again with Boo and Ina, whom he had to wake up by beeping his horn because they. On Monday afternoon, Mr. Bold visited the safari park again, and Boo and Ina, whom he had to wake up by beeping his horn because they were so tired from their nightly On Monday afternoon, Mr. Bold visited the safari park again, and Boo and Ina, whom he had to wake up by beeping his horn because they were so tired from their nightly exertions, said things were going excellently from their end too. If everything went according to plan, the two tunnels should join up on Tuesday night. Tony came up to speak to Fred. Tony came up to speak to Fred too. Thank you, he said, his eyes watery with emotion. From the bottom of my heart, I promise I will be no trouble to you and your family. What you're doing for me is so kind. I can't think how I can ever repay you. But you don't think anything could go wrong, do you? He looked worried. A little bit, yeah, but I don't want to talk about it in detail. Moving on. Fred shook his head reassuringly. Don't you worry about a thing, Tony. It's all under control, and we're looking forward to having you. You will have a lovely life with us. We've got the spare room all ready for you. And a nice comfy bed, litter tray, dog biscuits. You'll be very happy. I promise. It was Tuesday afternoon, and not long before the night of the final dig, when the two tunnels should meet and Tony could make his escape. By now, Mr. McNumpty was convinced there was something very sinister going on with his next door neighbors. What possible explanation could there be for such strange nocturnal activities? Grave robbers? He wondered darkly. He even went to the local cemetery to see if there was anything evident. He even went to the local cemetery. He even went to the local cemetery to see if there was any evidence. But there was no sign of anything much. Mr. Bold was right, though. There was no law against going out at night, and there wasn't anything Mr. McNumpty could do about it. That afternoon, Minnie came over dragging a large black garbage bag. I'm not sure. I think school, like, are you talking about school in general or just the school I went to? Yes, I actually have some plans for the future. If you want to give me, if you want, I can give you a clue. Um, let's just say that the next read along is going to be about sharks. I got as many big bones as I could, she said. I got as many big bones as I could, she said, a little breathlessly, from the back room of my dad's shop, where they cut all the meat up. Mr. Bold peered inside and licked his lips. They were big, juicy bones and ribs, perfect for fooling safari park keepers. Well done, Minnie. Well done, Minnie, he said, restraining himself from having a quick nibble. Well done, Minnie, he said, restraining himself from having a quick nibble. They'll think this is all that's left of poor Tony, he said. He placed the garbage bag carefully by the front. He placed the garbage bag carefully by the front door. I think this calls for a few butcher jokes. Listen up, everyone. He cleared his throat and waited until everyone was listening eagerly. What happened when the butcher backed into the bacon slicer? He got a little behind on his work. What happened when the butcher backed into the baker's slice? What happened when the butcher backed into the bacon slicer? He got a little behind with his work. Everyone laughed heartily and asked for another joke. Let me see, said Mr. Bold. Ah, yes. Two butchers in a kayak were chilly, so they lit a fire and the kayak sank. Which just goes to show, doesn't it? You can't have your kayak and eat. Alright, see you later, Trace. Two butchers in a kayak were a bit chilly, so they lit a fire and the kayak sank. Which goes to show, doesn't it? You can't have your kayak and eat it too. Before the buds left for the final dig that night, Fred gathered them all around the kitchen table and checked the time. Honestly, it would just feel weird. What does a clock say? What does a clock do when it's hungry? Goes back 4 seconds. Betty and Bobby giggled. No, seriously, continued their father. We're nearly home and dry. No, seriously, their father continued. We're nearly home and dry, folks. All being well. In a few hours' time, our work will be done, and we will be welcoming a new member to our family. Hurrah! Said Bobby. Yes, indeed, said Mr. Bold. But I just want to run through a few things. Firstly, poor Tony is a hyena like us, but he hasn't. Firstly, poor Tony is a hyena like us, but he hasn't yet learned to disguise this fact. We need to be careful. We are being watched, and I think you know what. We need to be careful. We are being watched, and I think you know who I'm. And I think you know to who I am referring. Nosy McNumpty, said Betty without hesitation. Yes, said Mr. Bold. His eyes began to twinkle, which usually meant he was about to tell another joke. Yeah, this is something I can't stand. I haven't seen much of Hanna-Barbera cartoons. The only thing Hanna-Barbera related I've seen was Scooby-Doo. What do you call a man whose neighbors take on? What do you call a man whose neighbor takes his tools? What do you call a man whose neighbors take his tools? Hold on. What do you call a man whose neighbor takes his tools? What do you call a man whose neighbor takes his tools? A saw loser! Oh, really, Fred? Said Mrs. Bolt, smiling. This is no joking matter. Sorry, I couldn't resist, said Mr. Bold. Seriously, though, we shall have to keep our curtains drawn, and Tony mustn't go for a runabout in the garden unless we are sure the coast is clear. Understood? Yes, sir, said the twins. Mr. McNumpty knows we are up to something, so we have to be extra careful. And it's going to take poor Tony a while to adjust, added Mrs. Bold. He is old and probably wise, but he has never lived in a house before. We must be patient and understanding with him. He'll need toilet training, among other things. No, I haven't been to Disneyland. It's probably expensive. Yeah, I have heard about that. Mr. Bold nodded in agreement, then said, Why did the toilet paper roll down the hill? To get to the bottom! said Bobby. Want another one? Asked his father. Oh, go on then, said Mrs. Bold. But quickly, then we really must be off. Goes, said Fred. Some thieves broke into a police station and stole the toilet. The police are investigating, but for now they've got nothing to go on. Boom, boom! A short while later, carrying the garbage bag full of bones and the flashlight, they set off. Mr. McNumpty glowering at them from his bedroom. Mr. McNumpty glowering at them from his bedroom window. Yes, I have heard Ash is leaving Pokemon, but I think it's for the best. He's already won the World Championship, so it kind of makes sense for him to leave. I don't know, my sleep schedule's fucked. I'm not sure. My sleep schedule's fucked. There was a thunderstorm going on that night, so the work was even muddier than before. There was a thunderstorm going on that night, so the work was even muddier than usual. It was particularly tough going. It was particularly tough going, and all the bolts were exhausted. And all the bolts were exhausted. Welcome back, Abraham. After 2 hours of digging, taking turns every 10 minutes, all four bolts were down in the tunnel together, streaked with glistening mud and sweat, their clothes soaked and clinging to them. Then they heard a noise. Hush! Said Mr. Bolt suddenly. What's that? He shone the flashlight around the walls of the tunnel. And then he heard it again. A faint scratching noise coming from right ahead of them. This is it! We're nearly through! He whispered. Look! The wall of the earth crumbled slightly before their eyes, and the scratching sounded got. The wall of earth crumbled slightly before their eyes, and the scratching sounded louder. The walls of the earth crumbled slightly before them. The wall of earth crumbled slightly before their eyes, and the scratching sounded louder. Boo! Ina? Mr. Bolt called. It's Fred! The scratching stopped, and a faint hello could be heard. Stand back, said Mr. Bolt, and he began scraping frantically at the earth for a few minutes, until suddenly a hole appeared, and a big brown eye looked through at them. Who's there? Asked Mr. Boo. Who's there? Asked Mr. Bolt. Boo! Boo who? Boo! Mr. Bolt couldn't help himself. Boo-hoo! Don't cry! I didn't mean to scare you, he joked. I didn't mean to scare you, he joked. I literally don't know what that is. Bobby snorted with laughter. It's Boo, silly, said Betty. Yes, of course it is. Who do you think it was? The Prime Minister? Panted Boo. We've done it! Cried Bobby. Mrs. Bold was almost in tears with excitement. Within moments, the hole was big enough for Boo, Ina, and then, with a few moans and groans, poor Tony to climb through. And although it was a tight squeeze, they all slipped about and hugged each other. And within moments, the hole was big enough for Boo. Ina, and then, within a few moans and groans, poor Tony to climb through. And although it was a tight squeeze, they all slipped through about hugging each other and congratulating themselves. In the confusion, there was even a bit of bottom sniffing going on. But all of the hyenas were so euphoric. Who could blame them? I'm gonna have to say, Scooby-Doo, where are you? There is no time to lose, said Mr. Bold, once the greetings were over. Tony had better say his goodbyes, and then we'll get him into the car and away to Fairfield Road. Yeah, I'm way different in real life than what you'd expect. I don't really go anime anymore, so yeah. Hang on a second. I need another water break. Okay. Back to the story. Okay, that deserves a timeout. I'm getting so sick and tired of you people judging me by my weight. If you didn't catch it in the previous live stream, I just really hate it when people judge me by my fucking weight and not for my personality. Like, it's really getting me, just makes me so fucking mad. There is no time to lose, said Mr. Bold, once the greetings were over. There is no time to lose, said Mr. Bold, once the greetings were over. Tony had better say his goodbyes, and then we'll get him into the car and away to Fairfield Road. The Bolds all stood respectfully, while Boo and Ina walked over to Tony. We will miss you more than we will miss you more than you will ever know, said Ina. said Ina. Said Ina, tenderly licking his face. Me too. Me too, said Tony, holding back his tears. Tell the pups I love them, and we will be along to see them soon. Boo was next. He nuzzled him up. Boo was next. He nuzzled him in a manly way. Goodbye, old fella. Goodbye, old fella, he said. We'll be seeing you. We'll look after him. Don't worry, said Mrs. Bolt. Mrs. Bolt said. Mr. Bolt passed Boo the garbage bag full of bones. Chew on these a bit, he instructed. Then scatter them around the enclosure. With any luck, the keepers will think you've eaten poor Tony. Never mind about our reputation. Never mind about our reputation, sniffed Ina, although her mouth was watering at the thought of all those tasty bones to gnaw on. It was the best idea I could come up with, said Mr. Bold. Now quickly, Tony, come with us. Remember, you two, block up the tunnel, and remember, you two, block up the tunnel at your end as soon as you get back. His plan was to guide Tony along the tunnel to the entrance, then bundle him into an old sack and into the car, in case anyone was passing and a hyena was walking. His plan was to guide Tony along the tunnel to the entrance, then bundle him into an old sack and into the car, in case anyone was passing and thought a hyena walking along the sidewalk was suspicious. And I'm gonna take a bathroom break. Just give me a minute. I'm gonna bookmark my mark. I'm just gonna bookmark it, and yeah, I'll be with you in a bit. Okay, I'm back. and without further ado, allow me to continue with the story. Yeah. Um, let's see, where did I leave off? Here it is. They turned to Tone. Tony turned to take one. Tony turned to take a last look at Boo and Ina. Tony turned to take a last look at Boo and Ina, but just at that moment, the flashlight flickered and then died, plunging everyone into the darkness. "Oh no!" groaned Betty. "Oh no!" groaned Betty. "Now we can barely see a thing!" "Don't panic," said Mr. Bold. "There's only one direction we can go in. We can hardly get lost. Come on, everyone." The Bolds and Tony went in one direction, while Boo and Ina returned to the Hyena enclosure in the opposite direction, with the garbage bag full of bones. But just as the Bolds and Tony neared the end, there was a sinister rumbling noise from above them, and clods of damp earth began falling on everyone's heads. "Who's throwing things?" asked Mrs. Bold. "This is no time for games." I'm fascinated by the UK accent. The English accent, if I presume. "Oh no, it's not that," said Mr. Bold breathlessly. "It's the tunnel. I think it's collapsing. The rain has soaked the earth and made it heavier. We must be quick." At that moment, a long at that moment. Yeah, they do sound similar. I think with Australia, their accent is a bit more uh complex. If I can if I could be precise. Um but anyway. It's a good thing I have plenty of water on standby. Okay. Now to continue. I'm sorry. At that moment, at that moment, a huge lump of dirt. Give me a moment. Okay. After this live stream, I really need to rest my voice. At that moment, a huge lump the size of a football fell on. Would you stop that dead channel? Like, seriously, I'm so sick and tired of your bullshit. Sorry. Let's continue. At that moment, a huge lump the size of a football fell from the ceiling and landed on poor Tony's shoulder. "Ouch!" groaned Tony, and he began to pant. The cascade of mud, earth, and dirt water. The cascade of mud, earth, and dirty brown water continued to plop all around him. "I can reach this. I can reach. I can reach the ceiling if I stand on tiptoe," said Betty to her father. "Betty, you do the same. Betty, Bobby, you do the same. We can hold the ceiling up while we get Tony. We can hold the ceiling up while you get Tony out. Be quick, though." Bobby reached the Bobby reached up, and it was true. Bobby reached up, and it was true. Their paws spread out, they could both. Bobby reached up, and it was true. With their paws spread out, they could both hold up the small part of the slimy wet roof of the tunnel. I can feel it moving and cracking, gasped Bobby. Hurry! Hyenas can see more in the dark than humans, but muddy water was now stinging everyone's eyes, and the trickle through the twins' paws was fast becoming a torrent. I'm frightened, whimpered Tony, who hadn't left the safety of the hyena enclosure for many years, and was now wishing he was back there. We'll help you, Tony, said Mrs. Bold. Fred, you pull him up from the... Fred, you pull him from the front, and I'll push from the back. Please hurry, said Bobby. You can thank Shadow Reader for encouraging the hate. Dudes, this tunnel is nearly busted, said Betty. Dudes, this tunnel is nearly busted, said Betty. Her voice weakened with the strain of holding up the heavy mud ceiling. said Betty. Her voice weaked with the strain. Dudes, this tunnel is nearly busted, said Betty. Her voice weak with the strain of holding up the heavy mud. Dudes, this tunnel is nearly busted, said Betty, her voice weak with the strain of holding up the heavy mud ceiling. The water was now up to everyone's waist. Sorry. The water was now up to everyone's waist, and there was a lot of sloshing and grunting as Mr. and Mrs. Bold coaxed a frightened Tony along. The water was now up to everyone's waists, and there was a lot of sloshing and grunting as Mr. and Mrs. Bold coaxed a frightened Tony along as quickly as an arthritic, wet, scared hyena can go. But after several tense minutes, tripping and sliding in the darkness, moonlight appeared at the end of the tunnel, and Mr. Bold ran ahead. We've made it! He called back. You can let go now, twins! But listen! Scramble out of the way the second you can. There is no time to lose. We don't want that tunnel to collapse on top of you. Whatever happens. Yes, I hate Rule 34. I think it sucks. I'll count to 3. Then we'll let go together and run for it, instructed a bedraggled Bob. I'll count to 3, then we'll let go together and make a run for it, instructed a bedraggled Betty. Okay, said Bobby, who could hardly speak, his limbs hurt so much. There came a deep groan from above. There came a deep groan from above them. 1, 2, 3! shouted Betty, and the twins dived towards the tunnel entrance, half running, half swimming through the ghastly thick sludge. Betty! Bobby! called Mrs. Bold. Hurry up! The ceiling collapsed behind them in an avalanche of splashing and crashing. They made it out in the nick of time. And as the twins fell, exhausted, against their parents, a final belch of filthy gray mud spat over everyone. They were safe, and the tunnel was no more. There was quiet for a moment. Then Bobby and Betty began to giggle with relief. That was a narrow squeak, said Mrs. Bold. Look at you both. You're going to need a bath with bubbles. Who is Bubbles? Asked Mr. Bold, and everyone had a good laugh, which was just what would. Who is Bubbles? Asked Mr. Bold. Asked Mr. Bold. Who is Bubbles? Asked Mr. Bold, and everyone had a good laugh, which was just what was needed after such drama. But then Mr. Bold announced that they ought to get themselves back to Fairfield Road before anyone saw them. It wouldn't be long before the sun came up. Mr. Bold got out. Mr. Bold got the old sack ready and called to a rather bewildered Tony. "Here," he said. "Jump in until we get you home." "Here," he said. "Jump in until we get you safely home." It was hard to tell in the gloom, but from poor Tony's groaning and muttering, he seemed to be safely in the sack. Mr. Bold and the twins tied. Mr. Bold and the twins then tidied up the entrance to the collapsed tunnel. Mrs. Bold and the twins then tidied up the entrance to the collapsed tunnel, so it looked as if so it looked as it. Okay, seriously, are you just trying? Are you really trying to get a block? Because I can do that. Seriously, Dead Channel, are you asking to get blocked? Because I can do that. I already reported you. I already reported you for bullying. I don't want you doing it again. I don't want to talk about it, Mr. Blue Skies. Mrs. Bold and the twins then tidied up the entrance to the collapsed tunnel, so it looked as if it never had been there. Mrs. Bold and the twins then tidied up the entrance to the collapsed tunnel, so it looked as if it had never been there. And Mr. Bold hoisted the heavy sack onto his shoulders, and the grubby convoy and the and Mr. Bold hoisted the heavy sack onto his shoulders, and the grubby convoy made their way cautiously back to their car and set off home. When Mr. Bold carried the sack containing Tony from the car into the house, a wide-eyed Mr. McNumty looked on in horror. Who were these people? Burglars? Okay, let me see if I can find this. Let's see now. Uh, I'm not sure what I'm gonna be. I'm not sure. I'm not really sure. One side of me thinks it'll be a better year, the other half doubts it. Yes, I wish it would end. Like, I mean, it's been lifted up in the whole of the United States. I mean, the mask mandate's been lifted in the state where I am. So, to put it short, there's someone in this chat named Dead Channel who can't stop judging me because I look fat. To put it lightly, there's this user in the chat. There's this user in the live chat that's literally named Dead Channel, and he's not. And he's not. Like, there's this user in the. To put it lightly, there's this user in the chat named Dead Channel, literally, and well, like he doesn't stop me. Like he just can't stop insulting my weight. Like seriously. Like if you're watching this Dead Channel, oh my god. If you're watching this Dead Channel, I'll find you and I'll report you. I already did it once, so don't make me do it again. Like Stop it! Once safely inside, Tony clambered out and sat on the sofa, looking around nervously. Would you like a drink of milk, dear? asked, asked Mrs. Bold. You've been through quite an ordeal. Yes, I'll try one, said Tony, blinking and scratching at the mud on his tummy with uh, yes, I'll try one, said Tony, blinking and scratching at the mud on his tummy with his hind leg. Shall I get you a bucket of water? Asked Bobby hopefully. Give you a bit of a wash down? Thank you, thank you, said Tony. Suddenly, Betty let out a high pitched scream. The sack! It just moved! She said, running to her father. Wait a minute. Meh. Uh, Thankfully, we're almost done with this book. Hopefully. um. Uh. I think if I had to choose one power, I think it would have to be invisibility. Goodness! So it did! Agreed Mr. Bold. There's something in there. That will be Miranda, said Tony. She's probably peckish, so I suppose you have any grapes handy, do you? Miranda? Said Mrs. Bold, astonished. Who is Miranda? Let me introduce you. Tony reached inside the sack and brought out a tiny baby gray monkey with white fluffy ears. Big black shiny eyes, and a long striped tail. She immediately jumped she immediately jumped onto Tony's shoulder and peered at the bolts nervously. This is Miranda, everyone, said Tony. She's the marmoset monkey. She's a marmoset monkey. An orphan. But what? said Mr. Bolt. The other monkeys rejected her, so she attached herself to me for some reason. When she heard I was leaving the safari park, all the animals knew about it. You see, she cried and cried until I said she could. The other monkeys rejected her, so she attached to me for some reason. When she heard I was leaving the safari park, all the animals knew about it. She cried and cried until I was. She cried and cried until I said she could come with me. I'm sorry to tell you that. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't tell you before. I was worried in case you said no. Please let her stay. She'll be no bother. She's lovely, said Betty, stroking Miranda gently. She's lovely, said Betty, stroking Miranda gently. Go on, Mum. Please let her stay. Please, Dad. The more the merrier, I guess, said Mr. Bold. And Mrs. Bold agreed. Thank you, chorused Tony and Betty. Thank you, chorused Tony and Betty. The dear little girl, I'll cut you up some grapes, said Mrs. Bold. Does she speak? Just baby talk at the moment, explained Tony. But she's learning fast. Soon she'll get used to it. What do you call a monkey with a banana in each ear? Anything you like. She can't hear you. My least favorite My least favorite Thomas episode has to be Middle Engine. Mainly because there's no justice for Percy. And I also like the Bleep episode. I thought it was pretty cool. After enjoying a nibble on some grapes, Miranda made a few contented squeaks. After enjoying a nibble on some grapes, Miranda made a few contented squeaks and settled down for a rest against Tony. It's been quite a night, said Mr. Bolt. Shall I show you to your room, Tony? Shall I show you to your room, Tony? And Miranda. I think it's time we all had a wash and good. I think it's time we all had a wash and some sleep. But tell us another joke first, Dad, asked Bobby. Mr. Bolt laughed, then looked over at Miranda before saying, Where do baby monkeys sleep? Apricots! Chapter 12. Chapter 12. There are two things you must teach a hyena if it comes to live with your There are two things you must teach a hyena if it comes to live with you in your suburban home: how to speak human and how to walk on its hind legs. Otherwise, you will have all sorts of trouble with the neighbors. The Bolt set to work the very next day, walking lessons for Tony in the morning, talking lessons after lunch. There is a saying that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And although hyenas are very clever animals, and Tony was keen to learn, they that saying seemed to be there is a saying that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And although hyenas are very clever animals, and Tony was keen to learn, that saying seemed to be true, unfortunately. Especially if the dog, or should I say hyena, has arthritis. Especially if the dog, or should I say hyena, has arthritis. I don't know. There was a lot of huffing and puffing, and poor Tony kept falling over backwards, knocking into things and making a terrible racket. But despite all the noise and the commotion, there was a lot of huffing and puffing. And poor Tony kept falling over backwards, knocking into things and making a terrible racket. But despite all the noise and commotion, as the hyenas they had But despite all the noise and commotion, as they were hyenas, they all had a good laugh about it. And then Bobby had an idea. Why don't Then Bobby had an idea. And then Bobby had an idea. Why don't you use a walking stick to keep your balance? Why don't you use a walking stick to keep your balance? He suggested, wiping tears of laughter from his eye. Old people often have sticks to help them walk and keep them upright. Good thinking, Bobby, said Mr. Bolt. There's an old stick in the garden shed. Go and get it, and we'll see if it helps. But it didn't help much. Tony attempted tottering up and down the hallway with the stick, but he was still very unsteady. The problem was that for every 3 steps he took on his back legs, he did 6 on all fours. And there was no way that would ever pass as human behavior. These things take time, said Mrs. Bolt patiently. But Tony seemed to be getting rather upset and wasn't laughing much anymore. Next, the Bolts dressed him in a pair of tracksuit. Next, the Bolts dressed him in a pair of tracksuit. Next, the Bolts dressed him in a pair of tracksuit bottoms, a t-shirt, some slippers, and an old cloth cap. and he looked just like a rather hairy old man. Betty and Bobby roared with laughter when they saw him. Hot and itchy. Hot and itchy, was Tony. Hot and itchy, was Tony's verdict. Talking human was Talking human was proven even more difficult than walking on two legs for Tony, and the afternoon's lesson were worse than the mornings. Um, I have heard of Miffy and Friends. I used to watch it all the time when it was on Noggin, and a few times when it was on my PBS station. Yes, Miffy did air on PBS Kids. That is on WTTW. That is on W. That is on WTTW. Um, my favorite episode of the Upside Down Show. I have a few favorites, but I think one of them has to be Birthday because well, if you look behind the scenes, Shane and David, I think, said that Birthday was the final episode in production order. So they decided to bring in everybody who was in the series up to that point. Speaking of the Upside Down show, I think they're still trying to find funding for their movie, with little to no success. Poor Tony's heart just wasn't in it. He couldn't see the point. Can't I just pretend I'm foreign? He sighed. Just learn the basics, Tony, he pleaded. Just learn the basics, Tony, pleaded Mr. Bold. Like, hello, goodbye, my name is Tony, and you need to learn our address in case you get lost. Hyenas. Hyenas don't get lost, guffawed Tony. We just sniff the air and smell our way back to where we came from. Or have you forgotten how to do that? He added sarcastically. Suppose you have a cold? Asked Bobby. Suppose you have a cold? Asked Bobby. Then what? I think I like Pugs the best. Okay, let's continue. Well, what if I have a cold? I won't be going out in the first place, will I? Replied Tony. You won't want to be cooped up in the home. You won't want to be cooped up in the house forever, said Mrs. Bold. There's a big wide world out there. Sooner or later, you will have to go and investigate it. We want you to be free. There's Bushy Park, the library, the supermarket. Who knows? You might even want to go to London. Where? Where? Said Tony. Mrs. Bolt sighed. Maybe not. Let's face it, said Tony, shaking his head. I'm never going to be able to walk or talk like humans. I'm an old hyena, and that's that. Perhaps you should have left me in the safari park to die. He then went on all fours up to his room and stayed there. Yes, I like bunnies. Why do you ask? Let's see. Poor Tony, said Mr. Bolt. He's so unhappy. I feel terrible for him, and I haven't heard him laugh in days. Patience, dear, said Mrs. Bold. It's still early days. We mustn't expect too much too soon. I don't know. Miranda the monkey, on the other hand, settled in very quickly. Her initial shyness soon went, and she delighted in scampering up the curtains and swinging from the light fixtures, landing on the twins' heads when they least expected it, making them shriek with laughter. She could walk on her tongue. She could walk on her two back legs easily, and in her squeaky, high-pitched voice, she was soon speaking semi-human, enough to be understood, and getting better every day. I still watch Mr. Enter's videos occasionally, but I don't think I'll be keeping up with him anytime soon. And she was cheeky. Once and she was cheeky. She once filled her cheeks with water from the toilet, then opened the window and squirted it all over Mr. McNumpty as he was walking down his path. Mr. McNumpty, assumed he's been fired at with a water pistol, shook at his shook at his fist shook his fist at the bolt and called out, "Pests!" Betty and Minnie took in Betty and Minnie took to Betty and Minnie took to dressing Miranda up in their dolls' clothes, and Betty and Minnie took to dressing Miranda up in their dolls' clothes, and pushing her up and down the garden path in the dolls' carriage. Betty and Minnie took to dressing Miranda in their dolls' clothes, and pushing her up and down the garden path in the doll's carriage. One day, Bobby was watching them when he suddenly shouted, "That's it! That's the answer!" What are you jumping up and down about?" asked Minnie. "The carriage! Don't you see? Bring it outdoors, and I'll the carriage! Don't you see? Bring it outdoors and I'll show you. Where's Tony?" Poor Tony had given up on learning things after a lesson on how to use the toilet. After a lesson on how to use the toilet had ended with disastrous results. He now spent most of his days curled up asleep on the kitchen floor, and because he couldn't leave the house, he was bored and miserable. But there seemed to be nothing anyone could do to help him. "Tony?" said Bobby gently, stroking the old hyena on the back. "Wake up, Tony! I've had an idea!" "Yes," yawned Tony. "An idea, eh? Take me back to the safari park and..." "Yes," yawned Tony. "An idea, eh? Take me back to the safari park and let them put me to sleep?" "No, silly," said Bobby. "We never do that. An idea to help you walk. Come and try." By propping his front paws on the handlebars of the carriage, Tony found he could walk along easily on his hind legs, pushing the carriage in front of him as he went. "I say," said Tony triumphantly, "I can do it! I can walk like a human at last!" "Faster! Faster!" squeaked Miranda, who was still lying in the carriage, wearing a white lace gown and a matching bonnet. "Faster! Faster!" squeaked Marina. "Faster! Faster!" squeaked Miranda, who was still lying in the carriage, who was still lying in the carriage. "Faster! Faster!" squeaked Miranda, who was still lying in the carriage, wearing a white lace gown with matching bonnet. Thank you. "I'll put my tracksuit on. Then we can go in the garden," said Tony excitedly. Within minutes, he was expertly wheeling the little monkey in the carriage up and down the garden path. He looks so happy at last, said Mrs. Bold, watching from the patio. Bravo, Tony! A few days later, Tony felt confident enough. A few days later, Tony felt confident enough to take Miranda in the carriage for a promenade along Fairfield Road, with the twins walking on either side of him, just in case there was any with the twins walking on either side of him, just in case there was any unsteadiness. Tony was a bit alarmed by cars and bicycles, though he had seen many cars in the safari park, and he had to be taught how to cross the road safely. These black and white stripes are called a zebra crossing. These black and white stripes are called a zebra. These black and white stripes are called a zebra crossing, explained Betty. Zebra? What zebra? Zebra? What zebra? Said Tony. I can't smell a zebra. I can't smell a zebra. Don't have them at Teddington. I can't smell a zebra. Don't have them at Teddington, do you? No, not a real zebra, silly, said Betty. It's a place for people to cross the road, that's all. Look left, right, then left again, instructed Bobby, as if there is nothing coming. And if there is nothing coming, cross over quickly. I see, said Tony. Once they were safely across. It's easy when you know how. By the next day, Tony had decided he'd like to take the carriage out. On his own. Are you sure you're ready, Tony? Asked a worried Mrs. Bold. Will you be safe? What if someone speaks to you? I've got Miranda with me. She'll answer for me. So off they went. Yes, I am. Because I don't want to be associated with GoAnimate anymore. Let me just. You're gonna be hearing me clearing my throat a lot. These impressions are just that tiring. Excuse me. Fuck, I lost my place. So off they went. They met an odd-looking couple. It's true. Miranda wrapped up in a pink gingham onesie. And hood under a woolly blanket, and a poor whiskery Tony stooped over the pram and hanging on for dear life, dressed in a saggy green tracksuit and cloth cap. But they managed a successful half-hour stroll all by themselves. Each day after that, they went a little further. Sometimes to the park where Miranda would play on the swings, and where Tony bought himself an ice cream by pointing and nodding. At last, the elderly Hyena felt he was independent, able to leave the house and get some fresh air, and he was beginning to enjoy his new life. The rescue mission had been a success, and the Bolds' household was happy and full of laughter once more. Mr. Bold loved having someone from the old country to chat to. Mrs. Bold loved having someone around to watch the kids so she could spend more time selling her hats. And the children loved having Tony around to tell them stories, play games, and teach them the hyena war cry. Sorry. Sorry. Mr. Bold loved having someone from the old country to chat to. Mrs. Bold loved having someone around to watch the children so she could spend more time selling her hats. And the children loved having Tony around to tell them stories, play games, and teach them the hyena war cry. No, I haven't heard of Rex the Runt. But what about Mr. McNumpty? You're probably wondering. But what about Mr. McNumpty? You're probably wondering. Well, his dislike of neighbors. His dislike of his neighbors was turning to angry bafflement. What on earth was going on in there? It was hard to keep up. After that strange week of nighttime outings and mud-covered returns, things had seemed to return to normal. If anything, after that strange week of nighttime outings and mud-covered returns, things had seemed to return to normal. If anything ever was normal next door. If anything ever was normal next door. But then the noises were heard. But then the noises started. Bumps and crashes, as if something or someone big and heavy was doing the But then the noises started. Bumps and crashes, as if something or someone big and heavy was doing handstands against the wall. And there was strange high pitched whistles and there were strange high pitched whistles and squeaks. A budgie? 2 budgies? 16? Mr. McNumpty didn't know, but he hardly slept for wondering about it all. There was the water squirting incident, and on another occasion, someone, someone kept throwing grapes at him while he was hanging out his wash. Unbeknown to the Bolds, Mr. McNumpty now spent most of his time spying on them. An old man seemed to be living with them now. An old man who dressed like a teenager and enjoyed wheeling a doll's carriage around. And what was that strange thing inside the carriage? A talking doll? A glove puppet? You couldn't make it up. Yes, I heard. Yeah. Mr. McNumpty used to watch television. Mr. McNumpty used to watch television a lot, but he didn't anymore. There was a whole soap opera going on right next door that was far more interesting. He had vowed not to speak to any of the Bolts ever. He had vowed not to speak to any of the Bolts ever again, which was a shame in a way, because it prevented him from knocking on the door and having a jolly good argument with Mr. Bold, which he used to enjoy. Yet he was intrigued by the whole household and their peculiar behavior. Were they hippies? Mad people? Aliens from another planet? Or as he always suspected, animals? Sometimes he wished he had someone to moan about the Bolts to, someone who would understand how terribly annoying they were. But he didn't. There had never been a Mrs. McNumpty, and there would never be. As far as friends or relatives, there simply weren't any. Mr. McNumpty kept himself to himself. Then one day, something terrible happened. Mr. McNumpty was on his way home from his usual weekly shop at the supermarket. 6 apples, 3 bananas, a chicken pie, 2 tins of sardines, a jar of honey, a loaf of bread, lamb chops, a nice bit of fish, some vegetables, a jumbo pack of toilet rolls, a bottle of dry sheer, a bottle of dry sherry, and a bar of chocolate. When disaster struck. When disaster struck. His sturdy shopping bag, which had served him well for many years, indeed proclaimed itself to be a bag for life, suddenly gave way along its seeps, and fell apart. Mr. McNumpty's Mr. McNumpty's precious purchases fell to the ground. Apples rolled into the gutter, tins under the park, tins under parked cars, bread, vegetables, chocolate, chops. Apples rolled into the gutter, tins under the park, tins under parked cars, bread, vegetables, chocolate, chops. Everything sprawled across the pavement. Everything scrawled across. Everything scrolled upon. Everything sprawled across the pavement. All right, see you later, ferret. Focus. There we go. There we go. Mr. McNumpty stood helplessly rooted to the spot. Mr. McNumpty stood helplessly rooted to the spot, unsure what to rescue first. A gang of 6 or 7 surly, bored youths with unnecessarily short haircuts who had been sitting on a wall smoking spotted him. They jeered at his distress, and then leaped off the wall and sauntered towards him, kicking his shopping items around as they laughed callously, delighted to have something to amuse themselves. "Clear off!" said Mr. McNumpty. "That's my shopping! I'll give you boys a good kicking if I catch you!" But the Tennington Massive, as the youths were called, took no notice, and, hoarse with laughter, took great delight in viciously squashing Mr. McNumpty's vegetables and stomping on his loaf of bread. They opened his sherry and began swinging it, passing it from one to another as they dodged the now furious Mr. McNumpty, who, red in the face and wheezing noisily, ran in circles trying to grab the agile young ran in circles trying to grab the agile who, red in the face and wheezing noisily, ran in circles trying to grab the agile youngsters. All right, see you later, Ice Luigi. "Help! Police!" cried Mr. McNumpty, running around aimlessly, still clutching his broken shopping bag. Finally, he caught one boy who had paused to guzzle the sherry, and left him and gave him a hefty kick on the shin. "Help! Police!" cried Mr. McNumpty, running around aimlessly, still clutching his broken shopping bag. Finally, he caught one boy who had paused to guzzle the sherry, and gave him a hefty kick on the shin. "Give that bottle back!" Mr. McNumpty demanded breathlessly. "Oh yeah?" said the pimple. "Oh yeah?" said the pimply boy, limping backwards. "See you later, Franco." He tossed the half-empty bottle to one of his friends, then lunged forward and pushed Mr. McNumpty to the ground. The atmosphere suddenly became very charged and serious. The youth's face was twisted with hatred. The youth's face was twisted with hatred, and danger hung in the air like a mist. What now, old man? See you later, Gigaham. Just then, as it so happened, Tony, who was having his daily outing with Miranda in the carriage, turned the corner of Fairfield Road and was confronted with a chaotic scene. Food was scattered all over the pavement, and the angry mob was closing in on Mr. McNulty, who was now frozen with fear. Animals have an instinctive reaction to evil, and without pausing to think of the consequences, Tony abandoned the carriage and with the hyena's blood-curdling war cry and an energy he hadn't displayed for many years, bounded on all fours towards the boys, scattered in terror. But Tony was too quick for them. His eyes glinting menacingly. Drool hanging from the snarling jaws. He snapped at the sprinting ringleader and sank his teeth into the boy's quivering rump. There was a rip of cheap denim. The pimply There was a rip of cheap denim. The pimply youth howled in pain and fear and ran for his life, squawking like a parrot. Tony then turned his attention to the other boys, who scattered in all directions like sparks from a firework. Drama over. Drama over. Tony sat panting on the pavement for a few seconds. Then, noticing Mr. McNulty staring at him with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude, he attempted to assume a more human-like demeanor. He cleared his throat, brushed himself down, then shuffled awkwardly back to the carriage and hoisted himself up again onto his back legs. Miranda, meanwhile, had collected what was left of Mr. McNulty's shopping and piled it into the now empty carriage.
"Don't worry, Mr. McGrumpy,"
she said. She said in her squeaking voice.
"Don't worry, Mr. McGrumpy,"
she said in her squeaky voice.
"We save your shopping."
Mr. McNulty stood in silence. He was in shock. Mr. McNulty stood in silence. He was in shock. So much had happened in the last 2 minutes, he didn't know what he had thought anymore. 1 minute, he had been walking home with his shopping. Then a loathsome gang had attacked him. And now the people he had thought he hated had suddenly become his heroes. But who or what was the old man? Could he really be? Much to his surprise, Mr. McNulty's eyes filled with tears and began to sob. He tried to speak. He tried to speak.
"Them nasty boys,"
interrupted Miranda, as she climbed back into the carriage. Interrupted Miranda, as she climbed back into the carriage, perching on top of his battered shopping.
"We get you home now. Nice cup of tea."
Chapter 14. Betty and Bobby could not believe their eyes when they looked out the front room window. and saw Miranda and Tony slowly walking a shaken Mr. McNulty to his front door, and then go inside with him. They looked at each other in shock.
"Did you see what I just saw?"
asked Betty. asked Betty. Bobby nodded. "I think so. Should we do something?"
"I don't know. Shall I call Mom in from the garden?"
Welcome back, Khalid. Probably. And the two of them rolled off the sofa, laughing. Next door, next door, Mr. McNumpty was in a no. Next door, Mr. McNumpty was in no fit state to be left alone. He slumped down on a chair he slumped down on a chair while Tony put the kettle on, and Miranda nimbly leaped from the carriage to the ca- and Miranda nimbly leaped from the carriage to the counter and back again, each time carrying an item of shopping. Thank you, the old man mumbled as Tony. Thank you, the old man mumbled as Tony handed him a cup of tea. Tony nodded and patted Mr. McNumpty gently on the shoulder.
He no speak English,
Explained Miranda.
he learn slow, understand but no speak yet. Me speak for him.
I see, said Mr. McNumpty weakly, taking a nice slurp of warm tea. What country is he from? Just a minute. Just a minute. Give me a minute. I really gotta rest my voice after this live stream's over. Now, let's let's continue. Now, where did I leave off? Well, there can't be much left.
Oh,
Said Miranda.
someplace far, far away.
He saved my life. I've been such a nasty, miserable fool. How could I ever thank him?
No need. No need.
Cheer up, cheer up, Miranda brightly.
Boy's bad. Tony bite them good.
And she gave a flute-like hoot of laughter. and she gave a flute-like hoot of laughter. And this set Tony off on a loud hyena cackle. Mr. McNumpty's eyes widened in surprise, but the laughter was infectious. And before he knew it, he was laughing himself. He hadn't laughed in years, and the feeling of it cheered him up instantly. Those boys will think twice before stealing anybody's shopping in the future, he chuckled. And that big one will have a set of good teeth. And that big one will have a good set of teeth marks on his backside. Sitting down is going to be a painful business for that young ruffian. They were all laughing loudly together, and Tony's teeth were on full display. Blimey, you've got some teeth, Tony. Blimey, you've got some teeth on you, Tony. Blimey, you've got some teeth on you, Tony. said Mr. McNumpty admiringly. Said Mr. McNumpty admiringly. Thanks, Blue Yeti. I've actually been thinking of it. I have some experience in voice acting after all. I have to take mine out every night. Blimey, you've got some teeth on you, Tony, said Mr. McNumpty admiringly. I have to take mine out at night. After the laughing stopped and the tea was finished, Miranda and Tony thought they should leave, but Mr. McNumpty seemed in no hurry to be on his own. So Miranda settled down in her carriage for a nap. The two old boys sat thoughtfully at the table for a moment. Much to his surprise, Mr. McNumpty was enjoying the company. Of someone at it. Much to his surprise, Mr. McNumpty was enjoying the company of someone his own age. He'd never been one for a chatter or gossip, so the fact that Tony didn't speak didn't bother him in the slightest. Right, like a game of dominoes? He asked. Tony shrugged. Rum rose, he tried to say. Dominoes, said Mr. McNumpty slowly. Dominoes, said Mr. McNumpty slowly. Don't you suppose you know what dominoes is? Tony shook his head. Let me teach you then. I've got a set somewhere. An hour later, when Miranda woke up from her snooze, the two new friends were hunched over the domino game, completely engrossed.
Grapes, please, Mr. McNump,
yawned Miranda. No grapes, I'm afraid. Will an apple do? Asked Mr. No grapes, I'm afraid. Will an apple do? Asked Mr. McNumpty. He got one of the rescued apples from the counter and handed it to Miranda, who proceeded to nibble at it daintily. And please, he said, blushing a little, call me Nigel. He turned back to Tony and the dominoes. My turn? Tony nodded. Bluey Edie, I think. A while later, the game was over and Tony and Miranda got ready to leave. Shall we play a game tomorrow? Asked Mr. McNumpty. Tony nodded enthusiastically. I don't know what my favorite color is. As they opened the front door, they found Mrs. Bolt standing nervously on the doorstep, with Betty and Bobby peeking out from behind her. Her skirt. She had come rushing in from the garden when the twins called her and had been wondering ever since whether to go around Mr. McNumpty's or not. And had been wondering ever since whether to go around to Mr. McNumpty's or not. Finally, her curiosity and concern got the better of her. Probably 1971. I gotta see how many pages there are left. Okay.
Is everything all right?
She asked, but suddenly couldn't help giggling as she saw Mr. McNumpty putting his hand affectionately on Tony's shoulder. Everything is fine. Absolutely fine. Miranda and Tony have been most kind, and we've just finished a delightful game of dominoes. See you tomorrow. Same time tomorrow, Tony? Tony nodded, and Bobby and Betty just couldn't help it. They broke out into the longest and loud. They broke out into the longest and loudest hyena laugh ever. Dominoes with Mr. McNumpty? Whatever next? And so it was that Tony and Mr. McNumpty, or Nigel, as we are now allowed to call him, became firm, if unlikely, friends. A game of dominoes after Tony's afternoon walk became a daily tradition, and they even progressed to ice creams together at the ice cream parlor, if you can imagine that. Glad you found my voice that entertaining. I actually have a previous live stream where I did the first part, if you want to check it out. It did Tony the world of good to have a friend, and he seemed much happier and more settled. And patiently, every day, Mr. McNumpty attempted to teach Tony a few more English words. Tony puckered his lips and bravely attempted to speak, but somehow his tongue seemed to get in the way of the words. But somehow his tongue seemed to get in the way, and the words came out back to front. Never mind. At least you are trying, comforted Mr. McNumpty. We'll get there one day. Nigel's animosity towards his neighbors was replaced with smiles and whatever whenever he met Mr. Bolt. Nigel's animosity towards his neighbors was replaced with smiles and whenever he met Mr. and whenever he met Mr. and whenever he met Mrs. and whenever he met Mrs. Bolt, a gallant bow and a cheery hello. He even put a Christmas card through their letterbox in early December, signed to every. Excuse me. Oh, Jesus. He even put a Christmas card through their letterbox in early December, signed to everyone at number 41. Kind regards, your affectionate neighbor, Nigel. Goodness! What a turnaround! Goodness, what a turnaround! Goodness, what a turnaround! Said Mr. Goodness, what a turnaround! Said Mr. Bolt, placing the card in the mantelplate. Said Mr. Bolt, placing the card on the mantelplate. Said Mr. Bolt, placing the card on the mantelpiece. Jesus, I can't talk today. There was a nice man inside trying to get out all along, said Mrs. Bold. It just took Tony to find him and winkle him out. Do you think we should invite him to Christmas dinner? Suggested Mr. Bold. It seems a shame for him to be alone next door while we are all tucking into our turkey. Yes, said Mrs. Bold. We've already got many coming. As our parents are going to be spending the day making soup for homeless people. Very kind of them. Very kind of them, said Mr. Bold. Although it does mean we'll eventually have to cook the turkey this year, pointed Mrs. Bold. Which I doubt will be tasty. It'll make a nice change, said Mr. Bold. And the two old fellows can have a nice game of dominoes after dinner. Perfect, agreed Mrs. Bold. And she sighed contentedly. Chapter 15, which has a fancy border around it. Ta-da! All right, see you later, Khalid. It had been several months since Tony's rescue from the safari park, and now he and Miranda were well and truly a part of the Bold family. One day, Miranda, just like the twins, would make her own way in the world. But for now, they were all happier than they had ever been. The snow that year fell thick and fast all Christmas Eve, and the Bolds awoke to see a magical wonderland outside. Father Christmas had not left their presents wrapped in Father Christmas had not left their presents wrapped under the tree as was usual, but instead had buried them in the garden. So before breakfast, all the Bolds went outside in their pajamas for a glorious dig. Mr. McNumpty saw this from his window, of course, but he didn't mind what the Bolds were. But he didn't mind what the Bolds did anymore. In fact, he quite fancied having a dig him. In fact, he quite fancied having a dig himself. After a frantic excavation, all the presents were found. Tony had a pair of nice warm mittens, Miranda had a skipping rope, the twins had roller skates, and Mr. and Mrs. Bold had shared a big, glossy book about Africa, which included lots of photographs of places and animals they loved. Christmas was Mr. Christmas was Mr. Bold's favorite time of year. The Christmas tree glittered with fairy lights. The house the house was decked with the house was decked out with garlands. And like that, we'll take one more bathroom break. Pardon me. All right, let's finish this thing. Christmas was the Christmas was Mr. Bolt's Christmas was Mr. Bolt's favorite time of the year. The Christmas tree glittered with fairy lights. The house was decked out with garlands and holly and baubles, and the table was laid properly with napkins, of candles, of course, candles, of course, Christmas cracker, candles, and of course, Christmas crackers. But the best part of Christmas, in Mr. Bolt's opinion, was that he could tell Christmas cracker jokes all day long. Knock knock! Who's there? Snow? Snow who? Snow good. I've forgotten my name again. What are brown and creep around? What are brown and creep around the house? Mince spices. Mind you, said Mr. Bold, I thought you were going to punch me in the nose over that incident with the bucket.
When was that?
Asked Betty. Good night. Okay, good night,
You know,
said Minnie hopefully.
Mr. McNumpty was up the ladder and dropped his bucket. It was the day I saw your tail and found out you were all hyenas.
Then, realizing what she had said, she stopped and covered her mouth with her hand, but it was too late. There was a terrible silence, and Minnie mouthed the word, "Sorry," to Betty. No one knew what to say, and for once not a single hyena felt like laughing. They all stared at Nigel, and eventually he spoke. "I know," he said simply. "Deep down I've always known. You are hyenas." Mr. Bold's mouth dropped open, and everyone looked at Nigel in a horrified surprise. "But you how?" Mr. Bold tried to best. Mr. Bold tried his best. Mr. Bold tried his best to form a sentence. "I met the original Fred and Amelia before they went on their honeymoon," Nigel explained. "I didn't actually speak to them. Didn't speak to anyone in those days. But then when they, or rather you, came back, I knew something wasn't right. Took me a while to work it out. Hyenas, eh?" He looked around the table. "Apart from you, Minnie and Miranda."
Monkey! Monkey!
Said Miranda. "Yes, I figured much." "Yes, I figured as much." "So, why didn't you tell on us?" asked Bobby. "You won't tell, will you?" "You won't tell, will you?" asked Betty fearfully. Nigel shook his head. Nigel shook his head and looked at Betty. Nigel shook his head and looked at Betty kindly. "No, I shan't be telling anyone."
"But I don't understand,"
muttered Mrs. Bold.
"I know you like us now, since Tony saved you from the gang and you made friends."
She looked affectionately at Tony, who was following the conversation with rapt attention. Who was following the conversation with rapt attention. But before? But before? But before? Why didn't you tell anyone before? Why didn't you tell anyone before? You used to hate us, said Bobby helpfully. Nigel smiled. I know. But you see, we all have our secrets. And I was terrified you'd discover mine. That is why I was so nasty. I wanted to make sure you stayed away. Oh dear, said Mr. Bold. This is all such a Oh dear, said Mr. Bold. This is all such a lot to take. Can I tell another joke?
Not now, dear,
said Mrs. Bold. So, what's your secret then? Asked Bobby. Hang on. All right. Well, I've never told anyone, said Nigel, wiping his forehead with his large hand. You know our secret, Bobby said encouragingly. We're hyenas. Yes, you are. And very nice hyenas you are, too. And more to the point, I trust you. All of you. He took a deep breath. I am not really Nigel McNumpty, the miserable old man from next door. In fact, I'm not a man at all. I am. He paused. As if unstable to say the words. Well? Asked Bobby. I'm an animal too. A grizzly bear. There was a collective gasp from everyone. There was a collective gasp from everyone. "Grizzly bear?" said Mr. Bold, impressed. "I didn't see that coming." And neither did I, if I'm honest. And I don't suppose you did either. Even the cleverest ones among you. Even the cleverest ones amongst you. The story just gets better and better. Look at the title of the video. You'll figure it out.
How cool!
Said Betty, taking a syrup.
How cool!
Said Betty, taking a surreptitious look at Mr. McNumpty surprisingly long.
How cool!
Said Betty, taking a surreptitious look up.
How cool!
Said Betty, taking a surreptitious look at Mr. McNumpty's surprisingly long nails.
What do you call a bear with no shoes on?
What do you call a bear with no shoes on?
Not now,
said Mrs. Bold. Bare feet!
But how come?
Asked Minnie, ignoring the joke.
Where are you from?
I was born in Alaska many, many years ago. I am indeed old. When I was born, I was truly wild and free. But when I was still a small cub, my father was killed by some fur hunters, and I was taken into captive.
Oh no!
Said Betty, a paw to her mouth. Miranda whimpered and ran onto Tony's lap. Shh! Said Mrs. Bold.
Let Nigel continue.
Mr. McNumpty smiled sadly, then carried on with the story. From there I was brought and sold a few times until I struck lucky. I ended up as the prize pet of a rich, somewhat eccentric Arabian prince. I was more than a pet. I was his constant companion, his best friend. I learned how to speak in several languages, and how to conduct myself in social circles. I wined and dined with heads of state. I played poker. I saw the best shows on Broadway. I dated some of the most beautiful women in the world. Those were indeed happy days. He sighed wistfully at the memory. And when we weren't traveling around in first class, I lived in sumptuous style in the prince's palace. I wore a gold and diamond encrusted collar, and slept in a marble floored den, with my own servants on a 4-poster bed under a Herod's duvet.
Wow! Imagine that!
Said Betty. The prince and I were inseparable. We flew all over the world. Summer season in St. Tropez. Skiing in Aspen. Hollywood parties. Ascot. The Oscars.
Red carpets?
Minnie squeaked.
Red carpets?
Minnie squeaked. And Mr. McNumpty nodded at her. Yes, all right, we get the idea. Yes, all right, we get the idea, interrupted Mr. Bold. Hey, I'm just about done. Why do bears wear fur coats? Because we look silly in anoraks. Stop it with the jokes for a minute, Dad, pleaded Bobby. I want to know what happened next. Oops, pardon me, said Mr. Bold, trying to look serious. which was impossible.
Yes, I want to know too,
said Betty.
How come you ended up in a little house in Tedding? How come you ended up in a little house in Teddington?
Well, said Nigel, looking a little sad, the prince simply got tired of me. Got a new plaything. A leggy brunette. A leggy brunette. Ostrich, I think she was. A flighty thing, but very seductive eyes. I was surplus to requirements.
So why didn't you? So why didn't he just send you back to Alaska?
Asked Minnie reasonably. I knew too much, answered Nigel, lowering his voice. All of his secrets. And to answer your question about how I ended up here, I really don't know the answer. One minute, I was eating smoked salmon by the pool. 1 minute, I was eating smoked salmon by the pool at the Hotel du Paris in Monte Carlo. And the next thing I knew, I woke up here, feeling decidedly woozy and alone. I thought the salmon tasted odd. I think it must have been. I think I must have been drugged. I think I must have. I think I must have been drugged. Hey, Transformers Guy 48. Here I found a wardrobe full of cheap clothing. Here I found a wardrobe full of cheap clothing in my size and details of a bank account in my name. I received a monthly allowance from the prince. He is a generous man, so this became my life. I've tried to keep myself to myself ever since. A question of survival.
Gosh,
Said Mrs. Bald after a respectful silence.
that's quite a story. No wonder you were miserable.
But I hope, said Nigel, that we can put all of that behind us. The past is done with. What matters is that we are all here, living happily next door to each other. How we got here isn't important, surely.
You're quite right,
agreed Mrs. Bald, reaching for the cheese box. May I now? Asked Mr. Bald, who had been fidgeting throughout Mr. McNumpty's story. It is Christmas Day, after all.
Yes, dear. You may now tell us a joke,
said Mr. Bald.
Yes, dear. You may tell us all a joke,
said Mrs. Bald. Why are bears large, brown, and hairy? Because, answered Mr. McNumpty with a sigh, if we were small, white, and smooth, we'd be eggs. You seem to have heard all the bear jokes before, said Mr. Bald, somewhat. You seem to have heard all the bear jokes before, said Mr. Bald, somewhat crestfallen. Oh, yes, heard 'em all many times, confirmed Mr. McNumpty, when I was with the prince. Just then, there was a loud crack, and everyone turned to look at Tony, who had a look of astonishment on his face. He was holding in each paw the two ends of a Christmas cracker.
Don't worry, Tony,
said Betty, who was sitting next to him.
They're meant to make that noise. It's all part of the fun.
And she gave poor Tony a reassuring scratch behind his ears. Mr. Bold picked up the small folded piece of paper that had fallen onto Tony's plate, as Tony sniffed one half of the cracker tentatively. For a moment, and then swallowed it in one gulp. What do you get when you eat a Christmas cracker? Read Fred. Everyone thought for a moment. Tinselitis? Answered Tony. Tinselitis? Answered Tony, bits of chewed up gold paper falling from his mouth. squealed Miranda excitedly. She was sitting on the windowsill eating some nuts. And what's more, he made a joke, said Mr. Bold. Hurrah! Merry Christmas to all hyenas everywhere! Everyone cheered and laughed until they thought they would burst. And beneath his furry cheeks, Tony blushed with pride. Merry Christmas, he said loudly. Happy Christmas, everyone! And that is where we shall leave them, pulling crackers, telling jokes, and laughing. I told you at the beginning that this would be a funny, peculiar story, didn't I? Well, I hope you've enjoyed it. Now all you need to remember is that it's true. Every word. I can never lie. Now all you need to know, now all you need to remember that it's true. Every word. I never tell lies. And with that, I'm finished. Finally got through that whole book in 2 live streams. I have to rest my voice now, so I'm going to be taking a little break from video making. And with that, actually, I'm going to be taking a little bit of a break from doing on-camera stuff and showing off my voice. Although all of you may seem to enjoy it, I have to rest my voice for a bit. Seriously, doing the first chapter was hard enough already. But anyway, thank you for tuning into the live stream. This is Brennan Barty signing off, and Merry Christmas.